In this video, I'll be testing 9 of the most popular all-terrain tyres on the market to find out exactly which tyre is best in the dry, the wet, off-road, seeing which tyre uses the least gas, which tyre has the lowest noise, and which tyre is the most comfortable. Basically, everything you'll ever need to know about these popular all-terrain tyres. Due to the sheer range of tyres available in this size, there's definitely some tyres I've wanted to test that I've not been able to include. If I've missed out your favourite, please let me know below in the comments. Also, if you know the all-terrain tyre segment, you'll know these are all from the milder end of the spectrum, which are designed to spend more time on road than their more aggressive all-terrain brothers. If this video does well, I'll of course test more aggressive all-terrain tyres in the future, so make sure you hit that like button. On test, we have the BFGoodrich Trail Terrain TA, the Continental Terrain Contact AT, the Firestone Destination AT2, the Goodyear Wrangler All-Terrain Adventure, the Nitto Terra Grappler G2, the Pirelli Scorpion All Terrain Plus, the Toyo Open Country AT3, the Travelstar Ecopath AT, and the Yokohama Geolander AT Geo15. As all these tyres are designed to spend more time on road than off, let's start the test with wet handling. The wet grip of a tyre is probably the most important quality, as that's when a tyre can really make the difference between a big old accident and avoiding something safely, because tyres do make the difference in the wet. So I'm giving this quite a lot of weight in the overall score results, and the astute of you will have already noticed, I've got to explain this quickly, the size I'm running is not a Raptor tyre size, although I'm in a Raptor. It's just a generic F150 tyre size. I did rent an F150, I tried doing some of the handling stuff in it, it just wasn't very dynamic. Great for a truck, but it just wasn't a Raptor. And if you've got the choice of using a Raptor or not using a Raptor, you use a Raptor always, because they're just awesome. Considering these are all-terrain tyres, I was very impressed with the wet grip of nearly every tyre, apart from maybe the Nitto. It was the only tyre that made this big old truck quite difficult to drive, not very predictable. I did have a moment where I outbraked myself and went straight on off the course, but luckily, as this is a Raptor, the planet is your course. I'm trying to be a little bit light-hearted about it, but in the wet, it really wasn't the best. Next up was the BFGoodrich. Now this did have better steering, more predictable steering than the Nitto. It gave you a little bit more feedback, and it had a very safe understeer balance. Understeer isn't my favorite thing, but from a safety point of view, that's smart. But with the BFGoodrich, you were waiting on this understeer to quit before you could accelerate, which meant you were quite slow. So it just needed a bit more front axle. The Toyo and Pirelli were next around the 84-second mark, and while they were very close in time, they were quite different in the way they delivered it. The Toyo was a confusing tyre, difficult to drive quickly due to very limited feedback, and when it was sliding, it took a long time to recover. Whereas the Pirelli, what a joy. Almost felt like a sports tyre. Obviously it's not, it's an AT tyre, but of the group, it was the most direct, the most responsive in the wet, and it was really nice to drive. The Travelstar was next, the budget Travelstar, with impressive grip for its price point. What was less impressive was its dynamic qualities, its subjective handling, as it gave you almost no feedback, and it was a little bit confusing past the limit, but I can't argue with the grip. I'm very impressed, considering this is by far the cheapest tyre in test, and cheaper than the Nitto, which was well behind it in terms of grip. The next pair was Goodyear and Yokohama. Like the Pirelli, the Goodyear was just a really nice rounded tyre. Goodyear have a habit of making just nice rounded products, and I'm glad it continues into the all-terrain segment in the wet. I was very impressed. Let's see how it does for the rest of the test. The Yokohama, on the other hand, buckets of grip, especially when braking, but like some of the other tyres, it was just a bit woolly on the feedback and understeered primary. Safe, but just a little bit dull, and you just want a bit more turning if you enjoy driving. The final two tyres were Firestone and Continental. These tyres were almost identical on time on every single, I do 3 laps on each and then average them out, and their lap times were almost identical on every lap. But the Continental, if one has to be ahead, it was the Continental by the tiniest of margin. Like some previous tyres that were close, they delivered their times in different ways, with the Firestone being the woolly, understeery, not that dynamic tyre, and the Continental being the fun, dynamic, and because it was the fastest, and because it was dynamic, and because you could really understand what the car was doing under you, it is my favourite subjectively, and is the fastest tyre. So well done Continental, that's an impressive product. Let's see if it all stacks up in braking.
Pleasingly, the wet braking results almost exactly match the wet handling, with Continental, Firestone, Goodyear and Yokohama offering the highest levels of safety. The deeper water of the hydroplaning test did mix up the order. The straight hydroplaning results are on the screen now, and you can find the curved results on the Tyre Reviews website linked in the description.
In a seeming repeat of wet handling form, sadly Nitto and BFGoodrich were at the back in the dry. They weren't bad tyres, none of the tyres were. They were just a little bit slower than the rest. Didn't provide quite as much feedback, not that any of the tyres provided a lot of feedback, and they were just lacking a little bit of grip laterally. All the rest of the tyres were within the same second, so you can see how close a group it was. If I had to declare a winner subjectively, it would be the Goodyear. It's a very, very nice steering tyre. It's a quick, direct steering tyre. It loads up nicely and it's very predictable, so good job Goodyear. With Firestone, Pirelli, Nitto and Travelstar being the next group of very good tyres. The Conti and Yokohama also felt quite similar. They were just a little bit less direct on the steering than the group, a little bit softer and provided less feedback than the others, but like I've already said, none of the tyres provided a huge amount of feedback, but they're all terrain tyres and this is a Raptor. I mean, I don't know what I was expecting. None of the tyres gave me any surprises in the 35 odd laps of dry handling I've done. And when I was doing the below limit stuff, which is simulating emergency lane changes, so kind of like that, and seeing if the back switches around, none of them had any issues. So with all of them doing a very good job in dry handling, let's see how dry braking spreads the field, as that one does normally pull the tyres apart a little bit more.
Continental once again excelled in braking, leading the way in the dry by over 2 feet. This time, Travelstar, Goodyear, Pirelli and Toyo with the best of the rest.
Gravel handling. Now gravel handling is one of the most fun tests and also one of the most difficult to get right. The 3 laps I do to get my average lap time takes me about 3 minutes. It's about a minute a lap. And then after that, a very talented person in a very expensive tractor and trailer has to come and spend about half an hour redoing the surface, so it's exactly the same for every single tyre. We don't mess around when doing testing, and gravel handling is one of those you really have to put the work in to get good results. As gravel is a little bit different from driving around on the road, I'm going to score it a little bit different. I'm also going to concentrate quite heavily on what I call sublimit, which is how the tyre is when not pushing on so much. So just at normal driving speeds, when you turn, does the tyre bite? Do you get any then movement from the rear of the tyre? And that's going to weigh a lot more on the overall scoring than the actual raw lap time. However, I am of course going to do the raw lap time because it's a lot of fun driving this around, and I do care about ultimate grip even if it isn't super relevant. The most difficult tyres to get around the lap were the Continental, Nitto and the Yokohama. The Continental was particularly difficult sublimit because it took a fraction of a second longer than most of the other tyres to start turning, and then mid-turn the rear would come around. The Continental did get better past limits, so when you were sliding, but both the Conti and the Yokohama, you were working a lot, you were seesawing a lot to try and keep the car in line, and it kept you on your toes. The Nitto was a little bit better past the limit. The slide was more progressive, but it just didn't have the most grip. The Goodyear and Pirelli were next. I thought both of these, actually along with the Nitto, would do really well because they have a kind of off-road blocky looking tread pattern, but I guess there's more to it than just tread pattern. They were better sublimit, but both did lack a little bit of grip compared to the best tyres on test. Firestone and Travelstar were next. They were both quite a bit better sublimit. I think the Travelstar had the slight edge, and once they were sliding, they were quite predictable and progressive. But the stars of the show were Toyo and BFGoodrich. The BFGoodrich is an off-road brand, and it really showed in this test, as the BFGoodrich was the best sublimit. The Toyo was very good, but the BFGoodrich was the best. It had the best progressivity, the best controllability when you were sliding, and it had the most grip because it provided the fastest lap time. So if you live at the end of a gravel driveway and you want a mild all-terrain tyre, get the BFGoodrich. Like gravel, dirt is a very difficult surface to test on. I'd probably argue it's more difficult because it's part hard pack, part dusty, part rocky, part rutty, and it does change as the test goes on. But as the group is all very, very close, it seems we've got the surface right, which I'm very proud of. Me and the team, we've done a good job keeping this surface prepared. The best tyres on test were once again the Toyo and the BFGoodrich, the off-road king of this test. The worst, or the most difficult to get around the lap, were the Yokohama and the Nitto. I don't know what's going on with this Nitto because the Toyo's so good, but this is how it is. Like, it confused me whenever I work out the results and see who's who from the blind testing, but that's how it is. The mid group is so close, you can't really separate them on time. Subjectively, I think the Continental and the Pirelli are probably my favorite to drive of the mid group, with an honorable mention to the Goodyear. Now, I could spend another 10 minutes talking about dirt, but I'm not going to, because this video is already way too long. But I will leave a link in the description to the Tyre Reviews website, and I'll try and write a little bit more on the article that goes along with this test. So if you are interested in the dirt performance of the tyres, you can read it all there. And wow, this surface is getting really bumpy, and this Raptor is really good. Noise and comfort, I think, is a very important quality, because these might be all-terrain tyres, but they're designed to be on your vehicle the entire year. So if it's loud and intrusive, which all-terrain tyres can be, or uncomfortable, it's really going to impact your life. So I've spent well over half a day going over these kind of impact strips and rumbly strips and everything, and trying to judge internal noise subjectively and comfort levels. Now, I did the comfort and noise testing in the rental white F-150, not the Raptor, because obviously this Raptor suspension hides a lot. We did also test external noise, and although external noise is important for tyre manufacturers, I think internal noise is more important, because you can have the same decibel of noise, especially with these kind of tread patterns, and one can be very high pitched and intrusive to the human ear, and one can be low and mellow and really not bother you, which is why in the score weighting I put more emphasis on the subjective internal noise conclusion I've come to, rather than external noise. The not very good award sadly goes to the budget tyres. As impressive as it's been this entire test, this is where it falls down. It was the tyre with clearly the most tread pattern noise in a straight line turning at all situations. It was quite audible in the cabin, and when you were going over the bumps, it felt like quite a stiff tyre. It rocked the car quite a lot, and then you'd get a secondary wobbly impact that just carried on the impact. So that's where the tyre's not so good. Nitto and Toyo were the next pair of tyres, both having some audible noise in the cabin and both feeling quite firm. The Nitto was especially interesting because it was noisy in a straight line, less noisy when turning right, but very noisy when turning left. Never experienced this before. It confused me at first because we're doing this on a right-hand oval, but I got to the bottom of it and that's just how it is. Strange. BFGoodrich and Goodyear were a step up again in noise and comfort. They were better, more refined, more comfortable, and I am actually going to put the Pirelli in this group. Good audibly. The Pirelli, why I'm separating this, the Pirelli was actually quite a firm tyre, but it was a very, very well damped tyre. That means when you hit a big impact like a pothole, it's a one impact and it's over with. The tyre dampens that impact out in a beautiful way, as opposed to like shaking through the car for a fraction afterwards, and I really appreciate that in the tyre. The Continental and Firestone were both very impressive, again in terms of noise and comfort. Though the Firestone did have a little bit of tread pattern noise when turning, it was one of the quietest in a straight line. So both those tyres are definitely up there in noise and comfort. But if you want the quietest and most comfortable all-terrain tyre, it has to be the Yokohama. The second I drove off the ramp out of the garage, I knew, because it was a step ahead of everyone in terms of ride comfort. So very impressive job, Yokohama. Some very impressive tyres, considering these are all-terrain tyres in the group, but also some ones to avoid if noise and comfort is a priority for you. With the gas prices as crazy as they are at the moment, the rolling resistance of a tyre, which is how much a tyre contributes to your gas bill, is very important. Firestone, BFGoodrich and Pirelli had the lowest rolling resistance, and Yokohama, Continental and Nitto had the highest of the group. So to conclude, as all terrain tyres mean different things to different people, there's no one best tyre for everyone. As I have to present these results in some sort of order, I've used a score weighting I feel suits the intention of a mild all-terrain tyre, i.e. more on-road than off. However, I've also just finished a big update to the Tyre Reviews website where you can go and adjust the score weighting of this test based on your own needs to see which tyre is best for you in your circumstances. I highly recommend you do that, as it gives you total control in finding the best all-terrain tyre for you. You can find it linked in the description. One final point, we didn't test wear, as wear testing is crazy expensive and time consuming to do. I have taken a high quality photo of each tyre after exactly the same number of tests. If you'd like to see them, comment below and I'll upload them somewhere, maybe the Tyre Reviews Instagram. While there is no best tyre for everyone, there's certainly tyres that don't perform, and the Nitto Terra Grappler G2 sadly embodies that. I know it's not the most expensive tyre on test, but I really did expect more, as I know Nitto is a very well regarded brand, especially online. Sadly, the Terra Grappler was outclassed on nearly every surface, and most worryingly had extremely long wet braking, stopping the F-150 over 16 meters longer than the best of the group. To give you a better visualization, From 62 miles an hour, when the best tyre in the test had you stop safely, you'll still be travelling 27 miles an hour on the Nitto. For that reason alone, it's a tyre to avoid. Significantly stepping things up was this, the BFGoodrich Trail Train TA. It was the king of the off-road in this test and is the tyre from the group I'd fit if I spent a lot of time off-road. However, sadly it wasn't quite up to scratch in the dry or wet, which does kind of make me wonder, if you spend a lot of time off-road, why not fit the hugely popular KO2 from BFGoodrich? That said, it does have a very low rolling resistance, so if you want a tyre that's good off-road and has low gas use and low noise in the cabin because it was quite a quiet tyre, this is a good choice. Just be mindful of its on-road performance. The Toyo Open Country AT3 was a similar tyre to the BFGoodrich in that it had a better off-road performance than its on-road grip, but it did brake better in the dry and wet, which is why it finished higher overall in my score weighting. It certainly wasn't as refined as the BFGoodrich, with more noise, less comfort and a higher rolling resistance. The Travelstar Ecopath AT All Terrain is manufactured by a Chinese company called Unicorn Tyre, and it turned out to be an actual unicorn, a budget Chinese tyre that's actually okay. It was the best tyre in the deep water hydroplaning test and very good in dry braking and on gravel. It was, however, let down in wet braking, on dirt, and was a very noisy tyre, so even at the price, there's probably better purchases out there. The Yokohama Geolander AT Geo 15 is probably the most on-road biased looking all-terrain tyre. It just seems to have an on-road pattern. And it had a performance to match its looks. It was one of the best in the wet, but it did struggle a little bit in the dry. It was kind of average off-road, but on-road it was by far the most comfortable tyre on test and had a low noise level. The real letdown, it had one of the worst rolling resistance levels, meaning it could cost you more at the pumps. Still recommended though, a really good product for someone who only does very mild, very light off-roading. The Pirelli Scorpion All Terrain Plus might be one of the older tyres in this group, but as a mild AT tyre, it ticks all the boxes with a great performance in the dry, acceptable in the wet, and very low rolling resistance. It wasn't the best off-road in terms of outright grip, but it wasn't a million miles off, and subjectively it was a very enjoyable tyre to drive on. I liked the character of this tyre, and if aggressive looking shoulders are your thing, this is one of the meatier ones. It's got these big old blocks. Recommended. The Goodyear Wrangler All-Terrain Adventure looks like it would struggle on the road with this really blocky sort of agricultural looking block design, but it was exceptional in the dry and wet grip test. It was also fine on gravel, very good on dirt, had low noise levels, good levels of comfort, and it was one of the most enjoyable tyres to drive on all surfaces. The only drawback was limited hydroplaning resistance and average rolling resistance, but I definitely fit this tyre. Highly recommended. This is one of the best all-round tyres in the test. The final two tyres in my score weighting were just 1% ahead of the Goodyear and essentially drew overall. It was extremely close amongst the top three tyres. The Continental Terrain Contact AT was the very best tyre in the wet grip test with the best wet handling and the shortest wet braking, good aquaplaning resistance. It also had the shortest dry braking, very good dry handling and some of the lowest noise levels. Where could the tyre be better? It had a disappointingly high rolling resistance, and while the lap time on the gravel did actually finish mid-pack, sub-limit subjectively it was hindered by slow to react steering and a wandering rear axle. A very, very good all-round tyre with peak safety in both the braking tests. I highly recommend this tyre, and this is exactly what I think a mild all-terrain tyre should be. Excellent product by Continental. Finally, the Firestone Destination AT2 finished just 0.03% ahead of the Continental, but with a slightly different personality. Like the Continental, it was exceptional in all the wet tests, but unlike the Conti, it was also one of the best tyres in the off-road tests. It also had excellent levels of comfort, low noise, and the lowest rolling resistance on test, which is a fantastic combination of things. The negatives of this tyre, it couldn't quite keep up with the Continental in the dry, and its steering response wasn't the best of the group. Like the Goodyear and Continental, this is the final tyre I'm putting the Tyre Review's highly recommended stamp on, and it is a very good road bias all-terrain tyre. So that's the end of the test. I hope you found it interesting. I think the majority of people would be really happy with any of the top 5 tyres, but I think the Goodyear, Continental and Firestone are really exceptional products and definitely live up to the category goals. To find out how good a mild all-terrain tyre really is off-road, I'm going to take the best tyre in the wet, which is this, the Continental, to Moab on the tyre reviews Porsche Cayenne to see exactly how far it'll get off-road when compared to a proper off-road setup. Should be a really interesting test, assuming the Porsche can even get there, so be sure to subscribe for that. As I said at the start of the video, I'm sure I missed out your favourite tyres. I'm sorry about that. Cost, timings and product availability were really tricky at time of test, but feel free to let me know below what you'd like to see tested next. Please give the video a thumbs up and share it with your friends, family, children, Facebook group, dog or whoever if you want to see more off-road testing in the future. And as always, safe motoring.